Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the WMATA Board of Directors meeting. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like to ask our Board Corporate Secretary, Ms. Ellison, to call the roll. Ms.
Chair
Ellison.
Smedberg, Vice Chair Gideby, Vice Chair Goldman.
I am still here.
Alternate Director Rouse.
Present.
Director Letourneau.
Present.
Alternate Director Meridian.
Present.
Director Slater.
Present.
And Director McMillan.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison.
And I see Stephanie is with us now, so
yeah, Stephanie
is also present.
Yeah.
Ms. Gideby.
All right, now we have the agenda before us for approval. If there are no objections, I'd like to consider the agenda approved as presented. Does anyone have any objections? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes. We have two sets of minutes for approval: the November 19th, 2020 board meeting and the November 19th, 2020 executive session. I'd like to move approval of these minutes as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. Motion in a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. We'll move on now to public comment and advisory body reports. It is time now for our public comments and reports from our advisory councils. I should note that we received more than 40 public comments for this meeting, and reading all of them into record would exceed our available time. However, we will provide expanded time today, taking public comments in order as they were received for 20 minutes instead of 10 minutes. Any comments we did not have time for will be made available to the board members and posted to wmata.com. I would also like to note that the public comment period has not yet started on the fiscal year 22 budget. We expect that will start sometime soon, and there'll be plenty of interest from the public in making their voice heard, given the severe impacts of what we must consider. However, it's important that comments come in through official process so they can be properly considered. Over the next month, staff will be working to make sure that the information we present about the budget and related proposals is accessible and easily understood so that our riders and stakeholders can provide us with their best feedback. With that, let's hear the first batch of public comment, along with reports from the Accessibility Advisory Committee and the Riders Advisory Council.
Hi, I'm calling in to provide a public comment prior to Friday's board meeting. My name is Kevin Lee, and I actually live in Accra, Ghana. But I'm calling in because until 2019, I was a lifelong resident of the DC metropolitan area. I grew up in Laurel, Maryland. I went to school in College Park, and then I lived in Arlington in DC before moving away. I'm calling in because, like many others tuning in now who have probably read about the proposed budget cuts, I was surprised and pretty dismayed at what we're looking at right now. It doesn't take a forensics team to conclude that cutting weekend service, adding 30-minute headways for Metro Rail, and cutting half of bus routes will send Metro into a death spiral. I recognize that you guys, have a limited hand to play here, and you're making budget cuts based on the resources you have. But the only possible outcome is even further reduced revenue, and it's probably going to be looking at an even worse situation next year. I rode the Metro pretty much every day for 5 years, and I can't imagine anyone waiting 30 minutes for a train every single day. Like, can you imagine standing at Greenbelt in the middle of January every day? Fewer people are going to ride the Metro, and the people who don't really have any other option are going to suffer for this. For my own personal stake, my family still lives in the area. When I come home, hopefully when COVID is over, I would like to be able to ride the Metro and go into the city. But you know, the truth is, until then, you're really just going to hurt people who need Metro. And I strongly and sincerely hope that you guys will beg, borrow, or steal to prevent these cuts from happening. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Judith Lavelle. I'm a resident of Washington, D.C. In Ward 3. I'm leaving testimony regarding the budget cuts proposed that came out earlier today. I am sure I'm joining a lot of people, residents of the district and in the surrounding areas, to voice my strong disapproval of these cuts. I think it's basically a slap in the face to the essential workers who have kept this city fed and well through this pandemic, you know, that may rely on these services on weekends especially in order to get to the jobs that they must do in order for the residents of the city to have the food and the health care that they need, and may not, you know, be in a high paying enough job to be able to afford a car, or, you know, don't drive for whatever reason. I think it's just unacceptable that the first solution, I understand these are dire, you know, budgetary restrictions, but I think that restricting service completely, eliminating it on the weekends, is just completely unfair and unacceptable to those people. I think it deepens the divide right now between work from home workers and frontline workers and essential workers. So I just think that there has to be a more creative solution available, barring the much needed federal funding that needs to come through to support WMATA and the federal activities that are so unique to this region. So just wanted to say that, and I really hope that the board rejects this proposal and finds a different solution that keeps essential workers top of mind and our most vulnerable ridership top of mind. Thank you.
Hey, my name's Shane Sanderson. I am a district resident. I'm calling pertaining to the proposed cuts. I really don't think they make sense, and I really think you need to find a better option. You know, I understand the rhetoric around your budget deficit, but, you know, public services cost money. That's why people pay taxes. You know, I think it is just insane, honestly, to propose cutting weekend rail service altogether. There's, you know, on a Saturday in the district, it's already a mess with out-of-state plates. And I hope the board of directors from Maryland and Virginia take a look sometime and see what it's like and extrapolate to what that might look like. You know, when you institute your brilliant plan. You know, I know y'all make a lot of money, so hopefully you can start earning it and, you know, maybe stop acting like leeches. If we're going to do cuts, maybe don't cut the things that people care about first. You know, I know that's your common gambit, but maybe cut the shit that doesn't matter first. Thanks.
My name is Raquel Susler. I live in DuPont Circle, Washington, D.C., and I travel with Metro, usually from DuPont Circle to Cleveland Park and to the Smithsonian. And I see that these are 2 of the 19 stations that Metro is planning or thinking of stopping the service. And of course, I am against it. This is the reason of my call. I think especially the Smithsonian is very useful even in times of pandemic. So I hope that you can hear this message and work accordingly. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Happy Hanukkah as we move into winter and the holiday season. We have had productive meetings in November and the start of December. As we reported last month, we welcome the addition of new hybrid Camry sedans to the Metro Access fleet and hope that WMATA will follow up on lessons learned during the unusual process that was used for the purchase of these vehicles. In November, the AAC was presented information on the new digital displays that will be replacing the current station ahead displays in rail stations. These will be ADA compliant and offer an opportunity for more flexibility in updating information relevant to service in real time. There was discussion about the amount of information and time needed to read the information versus the speed of presentation as they rotate screens. We are hopeful that the final displays will be usable by all riders. The Metro Access Subcommittee worked with staff to develop an effective and secure password system for web booking of trips that will be both usable and convenient. This month is the start of the budget season as WMATA plans for the end of the 2021 budget and develops the 2022 budget. It's a difficult and complex time during the COVID pandemic and ending of the CARES federal funding package that was so helpful this year. Mr. Wiedefeld attended our meeting this week and presented the budget overview summary that was presented last Thursday to the board, with thoughts of potential modifications as federal funding support appears and the COVID vaccines are implemented. We were heartened to learn that on the capital side, the new Metro Access vans are still in the budget, and on the operational side, there are no plans to reduce the Metro Access service area or time of service. The AAC would like to thank the board and WMATA staff for all that they have done and continue to do for their customers and the disability community. Wish you all a happy and healthy holiday season and hope for a generous and thoughtful congressional package for the new year. See you all in January of 2021. Thank you.
Chairman Smedberg and members of the board, it's my pleasure and privilege, as always, to present this month's Rider Advisory Council report. Like many of you at last Friday's Finance Committee meeting, we had more questions this month than answers. For example, we're not sure what data WMATA are using to support the assumption that such a low percentage of riders would return in FY22. We're not sure how recent developments with vaccine approvals and beginning distribution of these vaccines in certainly the UK, but also hopefully soon in this country, was taken into account. We're not sure how 30-minute headways would work if, for example, you are at a transfer station and just miss the train that you need, for example, to New Carrollton. Would WMATA implement time transfers to allow adequate time for people to go from the upper to the lower levels at these stations to make their connecting train? We're not sure what capital projects are being deferred to support transferring $160 million from the capital to the operating budget. And we're also not sure whether or not there would need to be legal changes, for example, if perhaps some of the $500 million in dedicated capital funding would be used. We're not sure how closing metro rail stations is a cost saver. For example, if station managers are still on site, then where's the savings? It's widely known that one of WMATA's biggest expenses is labor costs, and we're not sure how closing a station and losing potential revenue would actually save money. We're not sure whether or not WMATA will charge peak fares during what are ostensibly peak hours. Paying $5 for your trip to work when you're still getting 30-minute headways is frankly unfair to riders. We're not sure whether or not WMATA is making changes that would allow them to ramp up service. For example, if Congress were to provide additional transit support, but perhaps at a later date, once this budget has been approved, would WMATA be able to improve service in more than 3 months? During the initial phases of the pandemic, that was an issue that came up. We're not sure what lobbying efforts WMATA is currently engaged in, for example, through the American Public Transit Association or through Transportation for America. How could riders play a role? On the last point, the Riders Advisory Council has tasked a member from each jurisdiction working together to create a number of talking points that writers could use to contact their congressional representation. We will, of course, make this available to the board at a later date. I'm also in touch with a number of transit advocacy groups to see if there's something that we could do to be helpful in their efforts. I want to also point out that this year's budget rollout for the FY22 budget, coming so quickly on the heels of the FY21 budget revisions taking effect in January and February, was incredibly ill-timed and unequivocally the wrong choice. Speaking with, for example, the folks I talk to regularly at my grocery store, many of them were confused, and many were quite concerned that these budget changes were coming into effect in less than a month. These people have difficult jobs, and they have a lot to do already. The last thing that we need to do is make their lives more difficult. And frankly, WMATA should be now reaching out to these people with brochures on buses and trains explaining that, for example, fares will return on Metrobus and that some bus service changes will be going into effect on February 13th. We owe it to these folks, not just now during a pandemic, but every day. Like I said, these are tough jobs. I've worked in a grocery store myself, and, you know, we deserve to do, they deserve our very best efforts to make their getting to and from work, especially if they don't have a car or other means to get to work, as low stress as possible, now more than ever. On behalf of my colleagues, I want to wish you all a very happy holiday season and a very happy new year. I think it's probably going to be a little bit better than this one. Thank you very much, and good day.
All right, now we'll move on to the report by the chair. Last week and early this morning, the general manager presented his fiscal year 22 proposal, and as predicted, the outlook is grim with an historic shortfall of $500 million. I want to emphasize that this is a conservative budget, and we do hope to outperform it. But the board's responsibility is to balance the budget, and we have taken a very pragmatic, realistic approach to fiscal year 22. I also want to highlight the service proposal is aligned with ridership, where bus ridership continues to rebound, and we have preserved as much service as possible for bus customers. Further, this proposal keeps our commitment to advancing our equity framework by funding the Police Review Board, expanding police community outreach, and advancing our work on bus standards, as well as partnering with the jurisdictions to expand bus lanes and growing our small business program. I also want to acknowledge that the number of job reductions we are forced to contemplate in this proposal is shattering. I know I speak for my colleagues on the board when I say we are going to do our best to protect Metro service and save these jobs. We have reached out to our congressional delegations, key committees, and the incoming administration and all the funding jurisdictions to begin to make our case for fiscal year 22 so that everyone knows what's at stake for our customers, our workforce, and the business community. We have built a budget calendar from December through the spring to work very visibly and transparently through the budget process, to raise awareness about all that is at stake, and to actively partner with the general manager to bring our case before decision makers. And as I said last month, while we may or must be practical about the current economic realities, we are committed to Metro being a strong partner in our regional recovery, which means providing safe, reliable, and equitable service. I will end my report with this important reminder. Today's board authorizations, if it is approved for public hearings, is only the beginning of the budget conversation. It is now the time to hear from you, our customers and stakeholders. Beginning next month, the public comment period for this budget proposal will open. There will be numerous opportunities for feedback, including a budget survey and virtual public hearings. While this year's budget outlook will look and feel different from years past, your participation is crucial to Metro getting the final budget right. I encourage everyone to participate and be engaged in this process as we move towards a balanced budget. Lastly, I want to wish everyone a safe and joyous holiday season. This concludes my report. I'll now turn the floor over to the General Manager for his report. Mr. Wiedefeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you just mentioned, I mean, this budget proposal is, none of us like it. And we acknowledge the devastating impact it has on our employees, our customers, and the region's recovery. We will continue to make every effort to get additional federal funding on behalf of our employees who are facing layoffs and the customers who need a service to get to essential jobs, including federal workers traveling to the Pentagon. We continue to work closely with our congressional delegation, especially Senator Warner, on transit relief funding. We're grateful for his leadership and note that he and his staff have been working around the clock to ensure that any federal relief package includes help for transit workers and riders. I would just like to mention, obviously, as difficult as these decisions are with the budget and what we're facing, they pale in comparison to the personal tragedy that so many people have had due to the virus. I want to take a moment to remember a member of the Metro family who passed away of COVID over the weekend after a period of hospitalization. Unfortunately, it's the third Metro employee we have lost to this terrible disease. We're once again reminded that no one is immune from the deadly coronavirus, and we must keep wearing our mask outside of our homes, including in the office and in the field, and even around those we know. To further protect our employees, we've hosted 2 free testing clinics for any Metro employee who's not showing symptoms. This is an important way to stop the spread of COVID before the employee begins to feel sick. Nearly 800 employees were tested during these 2 clinics, and we will be hosting more during these critical winter months. Furthermore, our Chief Safety Officer and Chief Medical Officer remain in contact with jurisdictional public health authorities and the federal government as the vaccine distribution nears. We'll continue to do everything we can to keep our employees and customers safe, and remember, it's up to all of us to basically keep each other safe. And then finally, I do want to take a moment to note the passing of former Senator Paul Sarbanes this week, who represented Maryland in Congress for over 30 years and was a great supporter of Metro. Senator Sarbanes gained national reputation for his work in banking regulation, but he was also a leader in supporting the construction and expansion of the Metro system in its very early days. His legacy will live on for generations to come. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Wiedefeld. And I want to acknowledge all the work that you and your team have done over the past couple of weeks, reaching out to the federal delegation and the local elected officials, state officials, updating them on the budget. I think it was very helpful. I know many of them are very anxious to have some sort of sense of where the budget is going. So again, the start of this process is important so they can start plugging numbers into their budgets, which are by any measure going to be challenged as well in fiscal year 22. So thank you for all that outreach and the work that you and Lynn and others have done, and Regina. So with that, are there any questions for the General Manager? Ms. Gideby?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman?
No, sir.
Yep, thank you. Mr. Rouse?
No questions. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Letourneau?
No, no questions, but just echo your comments about the great work of staff in this extremely hard time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Slater?
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. McMillan?
No questions.
Okay. Next, we will move on to the report of the Executive Committee. The following item was referred to the board at this morning's Executive Committee meeting. The Framework for Transit Equity, Metro Bus Service Guidelines. Staff sought approval of the Metro Bus Guidelines. These guidelines will help Metro advance equity in its service by providing more actionable information to make future changes to service and opportunities to prioritize bus on roadways. Also, I'd like to note that these service guidelines represent a significant effort by the Metro staff and a clear commitment by Metro and the region and its partners to improving service for our customers. Before we go around for some discussion, can I get a motion for approval? Or I want to move approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Gideby. So there's a motion and a second. We'll start with the round of questions. We were briefed during the last committee meeting by Mr. Webster. Mr. Goldman, I'll start with you.
Nothing further.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie and Ms. Gideby, did you have anything you'd like to add?
No, I don't, other than grateful that we're moving this forward.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Rouse?
Nothing to add, but again, thank you for the great work here.
Mr. Letourneau?
Nope, nothing new.
Thank you. Mr. Meridian?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Slater?
Nothing further, thanks.
And Mr. McMillan?
No comments. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, this is a significant step. This is the first time in 20 years that the bus guidelines have been updated. A lot of significant work, the whole bus transformation project in general. So looking forward to see where this leads. With no further comment, Ms. Ellison, please take the call or roll call.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby?
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Aye.
Alternate Director Rouse?
Aye.
Director Letourneau?
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Aye.
Director Slater?
Aye.
Director McMillan?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to the report by the Finance and Capital Committee. And before I turn it over to Mr. McMillan, who chairs that committee, just one note, the Director, Secretary Slater, will be recusing himself from one of the items moving forward, so he'll need to mention that when we get to that item. Mr. McMillan.
Thank you. The following three items were referred to the board at this morning's Finance and Capital Committee meeting. Approval of West Falls Church Joint Development Agreement. Staff sought approval to authorize a public hearing on changes to the mass transit plan for transit facilities at West Falls Church and to execute a joint development agreement for the West Falls Church Metro Rail Station. Mr. Chairman, I move approval.
Thank you, Steve. A motion has been made. Is there a second?
Seconded by Jeff Meridian.
A motion and a second by Mr. Meridian. We'll go round robin as we do. Ms. Gideby, any questions or comments?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman.
Nothing from me.
Mr. Rouse.
No questions or comments, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Mr. Letourneau.
Nothing that I didn't say earlier. Thanks.
Okay. Mr. Slater.
No questions, thank you.
Mr. McMillan.
No questions.
All right. I don't have any questions other than to say, Nina, thank you for your continuing discussion with Fairfax County on a few of the issues that were highlighted earlier. So appreciate that. Okay, with no further comment, Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby?
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Aye.
Alternate Director Rouse?
Aye.
Director Letourneau?
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Aye.
Director Slater?
Aye.
And Director McMillan?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you.
Next item, termination of Prince George's County parking surcharge. Staff sought approval for the following actions associated with terminating the parking surcharge at Metro facilities in Prince George's County. 1, use the accumulated parking surcharge reserve funds to defease the bonds issued by the Maryland Transportation Authority. 2, reduce the parking surcharge in Prince George's County to 0. And 3, terminate the Prince George's County parking surcharge agreement. Mr. Chairman, I move approval.
Thank you. There's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Second by Goldman.
Seconded by Mr. Goldman. We'll go around as usual. Ms. Gideby, any questions or comments on this item?
None at this time, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman?
No, this is strongly supported by Prince George's County, and it will result in both a double victory here, a defeasance of the bonds, terminated bonds, and a reduction of the parking fees for people using those parking facilities in Prince George's County. So it's a win-win for the county and for Metro and for riders. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rouse?
No questions or comments. Thank you.
Mr. Letourneau?
Nothing from me.
Meridian?
No questions. Thank you.
And Mr. Slater, you're recusing yourself from this item, is that correct?
That is correct. I'm recusing myself from this item as chairman of the MGTA board.
Yep, thank you. And Mr. McMillan?
No comments.
Okay. As Mr. Goldman said, this is a win-win, and good work by all the parties for this cooperative agreement. Okay, with no further comment, Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby?
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman?
Aye.
Alternate Director Rouse?
Aye.
Director Letourneau?
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian?
Aye.
And Director McMillan?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you so much.
And our final item, authorization for public hearings on proposed fiscal year 2022 operating budget and the fiscal 2022 through 27 capital improvement program. Staff sought board authorization to conduct public hearings on the general manager's proposed fiscal year 2022 operating budget and fiscal year 2022 through 27 capital improvement program and associated service reductions and parking rate changes. Mr. Chairman, I move approval.
Thank you. There's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Letourneau. Okay, we'll go round robin. Ms. Gideby, questions or comments?
As I shared earlier, my concerns about expediting this public budget approval process, not being able to truly understand the plan that we'll have in place. I appreciated the briefing earlier from Lynn, who highlighted to me the need for us to really think about how we do proper engagement, more robust engagement, being more intentional about how we move forward. I hope that the general manager and the staff will really work to think about how we move beyond these 3 weeks, seeking stakeholder feedback at every level, especially those who are most impacted by the system and these decisions and the cuts that we're making. I also just want to strongly emphasize the thought process that this is a budget for the summer of 2021 through the fall and then into the new year of 2022. As we think about schools, its implications, I hope that WMATA will do all extensive, robust, beyond the standards of what we have been doing in the past, given the reality that this is a different situation, that it is not enough to say that the standards that we've used in the past are the standards that we should be using for this moment, especially hearing the comments from this board and the ways in which we were really truly hoping to receive feedback as part of this process. I also recognize that from a jurisdictional position, it is about making sure that the region is considered. And so I recognize that I may be voting on this item, but I look forward to my colleague, Jeff Meridian, voting in support of it to ensure that we can move this process forward. Moving forward, I do hope that there is a standard put in place to ensure that when there is a jurisdictional concern, that the matter may be considered and that there wouldn't necessarily have to be a external process for us to be able to explain where we are. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Gideby. Mr. Goldman.
Thank you. I think it's clear that I'm in opposition to moving forward with this to public comment at this time. I think that a 1 month's wait while we hear what happens in Congress and while we get a better sense of what the implementation schedule is for the COVID vaccine would serve us well. We last year waited till January to approve a board resolution to move to public hearing. I have heard nothing which tells me and convinces me that that wasn't good strategy then and that we shouldn't wait for another month and do this in January this time. Finally, I'd just like to take the opportunity to respond to a couple comments from my colleagues in the first round of comments in the committee meeting. First, my colleagues seem to believe that we have a tabula rasa here, a blank slate in what we're doing. But I do want to point out, which my colleagues are aware of, what the public may not be so aware of, that we've actually voted for a Metro service program for January through June of 2020, the end of the current fiscal year FY21, which is a fairly good one, a good one that provides a good transition to a recovery service plan, one that features just 15 minutes headways, late night service, weekend service, and bus service at 75% of pre-COVID levels. I'm sure everybody out there would prefer that service plan to what's being put out for their comment by the vote that my colleagues will take today. Second, I want to just point out that the compact only requires a public hearing if we're going to reduce service. If by virtue of the federal COVID money and by staff looking at the budget, ridership, and revenue forecast and can come to a point where we can get back to the service level we're going to be providing in terms of January through June of next year, then technically we don't need a compact public hearing, so we wouldn't be reducing service. We would be continuing into FY22 on July 1, 21. The service will be providing from January through June 30th, 2021. So while we do need to go forward with the public hearing for the capital program, which is a federal requirement, if we could, by virtue of what's going to happen over the next 30 days by what Congress does and what the FDA does in approving COVID vaccines of Moderna and Pfizer, we may find ourselves the ability to move forward with the service we're going to provide riders for the first half of this year, of 2021, I'm sorry, into the start of fiscal 2022. And the need for a public hearing, at least as required by the compact, will not be needed at that point. So I thank you very much and look forward to moving forward on this and hearing the reactions and the comments that will come from riders in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Mr. Rouse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I think a big thank you to GM and staff for putting this together. A little bit of perspective, with $600 million in lost revenue projected lost revenue from fares and non-fare, that's a multiple of many transit agencies' entire budget. I mean, that's a large amount, and although it may not be precise, and we hope that it's much lower than that, it's still be prepared for the possibility that that could be a reality. It's a duty that we have to consider. So, but the amount of work that went into that and to try to find different options and things that we can do it should not be overlooked. I mean, that is certainly the order of magnitude there is very large, and I appreciate the effort that's gone into it. And that's why I think it's important to move on this, not to accept it as reality, but as a possibility, and start the process so we can get informed information about what people think is most important, and even what we see is the actual ridership trends, so we can right size the system and do what we can, make the best use of the limited funds that we might end up having next fiscal year. Certainly, I'm happy to see that nobody has gone down the path of trying to take away safety funds or money from capital state of good repair, or try to finance operations. You've heard some public comment about death spirals. That's certainly one of the things that sends systems into those types of situations. And as this system very well knows, that lack of proper maintenance can really get you in trouble long term. It's not a solution. So I appreciate that hasn't come up as an option. Certainly long term, I hope we look at this and maybe there's some chances to diversify our revenue streams and change our financial model moving on. But the reality is right now we have to deal with what we have in front of us. That said, again, it's a starting point. I think our job here is to provide guidance, but still give staff the freedom to be creative in terms of not pulling them in too many directions. See this as an opportunity to maybe rethink our service model, what we can do, make the most of this situation. You've heard from many of the members. I'll go on a limb here and I'll say, I think Member Goldman especially, I think I know his position on turnbacks at this point, but I've also heard him in the same very same discussion, talked about looking at the numbers and seeing what makes sense. And so I think there's everybody on this board. I'm proud to see that there's a desire to get it right, and we understand the reality, but also be willing to accept alternatives. And I've also heard Mr. Letourneau and others throw out potential options for other ways of getting increased weekend ridership revenue, and I think that's all important. I think we need to take this as a starting point, not necessarily compare it to what we had in 2019, but maybe start to rethink, take this as an opportunity to reinvent Metro itself, and again, become a gold standard for other transit systems out there, and make the best of the situation. So that's all I've got.
So Director Letourneau, you'd be up next for comment.
I'm gathering we were having some technical issues there with the chairman. I'm sorry. So I don't think we need to completely relitigate the issue we discussed earlier in the Finance Committee. So I'll keep my remarks a little bit shorter. But that first speaker that we heard today said that the Metro Board should, I think I wrote down, beg, borrow, and steal to do what you have to do to avoid these kind of cuts. Well, we are begging. We're begging the federal government. We're begging all of the other governments to do whatever they can to help us, particularly the federal government with transit aid as part of a package, a relief package. We are borrowing. We already were borrowing, but this budget proposal recommends moving $160 million of normal operating into the capital budget, which necessitates issuing more debt and borrowing money to do it. Stealing is not something that we can do, and we shouldn't do. But I think for this board, what's in front of us is certainly sobering, and it's sobering for the employees involved. It's sobering for the entire region. It's sobering for economic development. It's going to be difficult for our regional partners to look at the level of service we would be providing in this type of scenario and understand, why they need to keep making the commitment that they are, which is very significant. But the answer is, if we do want to recover as a region, Metro is absolutely critical to that. Metro is central to it. The land use decisions that have been made in this region and continue to see investments, especially along the Dulles Corridor, where Silver Line is coming in with phase 2, but all over the region, not just there, depend on Metro. And so we have to do whatever we can to keep this system afloat during this time of incredibly depressed revenue. And that necessitates a proposal like this. I do want to say, in terms of the process that we're discussing today, as we heard from the general manager earlier, any further delay means an entirely new budget process for him and the staff. So we have to start over, and that takes a lot of time. And so you cannot simultaneously say that you want more public input and then want to delay this process because we've heard from the general manager. That will compress the timeline that we have for public input. And so I think by moving forward today on this schedule, we are in fact doing whatever we can to put as many of these options out there as possible, and then let the public. We've already started hearing, for instance, about weekend service, so that if we do have the opportunity to get some more revenue and get some money into the system, we know which things need to go back in first before we have to make those decisions. So I will be voting in favor of the motion. I appreciate everybody's comments. I know we'll continue to work together as a board on each of these things. We may very well have some different perspectives about each one of these specific cuts and what should be a priority and which isn't, but that's the point of a body like this, to make those decisions. But I really appreciate the work of staff to get us in a position to be responsible, and I hope that Congress is listening, not just to us and not just to New York and not just to Chicago Transit, but all of the riders, all of the people out there who depend on these transit systems for their livelihoods. That's who Congress needs to be listening to, because that's who they represent, and they need to do their job.
Thank you, Mr. Letourneau. Sorry about that, everyone. Dominion's doing some work in our neighborhood, so lost electricity there for a second. Mr. Meridian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me echo Ms. Giddeby's earlier statement about the importance and the urgency of meaningful public engagement. I know firsthand from running a government agency that there's always more public engagement that can be done. There's always new ways for us to rethink our strategy and ensure that we're reaching as broad of an audience as possible in as many different ways as we can, knowing that there's so many different ways that people receive information. And so I echo the sentiment that it's important for us to focus on that, not just during the process of hearings, but also beyond that, and informing and communicating the final result over the next several months. And I want to echo something that Matt said, Mr. Letourneau said earlier. We want to hear from as many people as possible. I think that's why it's important to have as much time as we possibly can. We want to hear the difficult feedback. We want to hear what matters to our ridership across the board, so that we can go into this process with the most informed decision-making that we possibly can. So I appreciate the hard work of the staff. I appreciate the time that many members of the public have already taken to offer their comments, and encourage as many as possible to please continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Slater.
Sorry, I had a technical issue, the same as you, Paul. I lost my phone, so I just kind of reconnect. But at this point, I don't think I have anything further from the Finance Committee this morning, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McMillan.
I also have nothing further to add at this time. Look forward to moving ahead with the process.
All right, thank you. I guess I'd just like to say I appreciate all the comments, from the board members, and I think it's fair to say that we are in, while we may not have a unanimous vote today, we are in total agreement and unanimous feeling that this budget is not acceptable, and we are going to do everything that we can together to make sure that we have a budget that is going to serve our riders, our customers, the priorities of our funders and the jurisdictions, and hope that we can make progress there. None of this is acceptable. I mean, it's going to be very hard, to get this right without federal aid, and even then, we will still have some difficult choices to make. So this public engagement, not only with our riders and customers, but also with our jurisdictional partners, making sure that we understand their priorities. So look forward to working with you all on that. And it's going to be a very interesting, and we'll have to really roll up our sleeves the next couple of months. So Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Giddeby?
No.
Vice Chair Goldman?
It's a nay.
Alternate Director Rouse?
Aye. Yes.
Director Letourneau?
Aye.
Director Meridian?
Yes.
Director Slater?
Aye.
Director McMillan?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Now I'd like to call on Michael Goldman, Chair of the Safety and Operations Committee, for his report. Mr. Goldman.
Yes, the following item was referred to the board at today's Safety and Operations Committee meeting. Staff sought approval of jurisdictional requests for name changes at 2 Metro Rail stations. The new Metro Rail station between Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport and Braddock Road will be named Potomac Yard, with a secondary name of VT. And at the West Falls Church Station, the secondary name of UVA will be removed. Mr. Chairman, I move approval.
Okay, we have a motion on the table by Mr. Goldman. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Letourneau. Is there a motion and a second? Go around with any comments or questions. Ms. Giddeby?
None at this time, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rouse.
No, last time I talked, it caused you to drop off, so.
Mr. Letourneau.
I don't have much to add from my previous comments. The only thing I do want to add, actually, Mr. Chairman, is just I know how involved you personally were in Potomac Yard Station and the amount of effort and work you did in Alexandria to make that happen. So this is particularly a good vote for us to be able to take to add Virginia Tech to that and all the work that the region did to help attract this campus and Amazon HQ too. But congratulations to you as well, Mr. Chairman, on this one.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Letourneau. Mr. Meridian.
No questions. Thank you.
Secretary Slater.
No comments. Thank you.
Mr. McMillan.
No comments.
Okay. Mr. Goldman.
No further comments.
Any round up? Okay. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby.
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman.
I can cast an aye vote now.
Alternate Director Rouse.
Aye.
Director Letourneau.
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian.
Aye.
Director Slater.
Aye.
And Director McMillan.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. Next, we have one consent item before us today. I'd like to move approval of the following. Indemnification of Moody's Investor Services. Staff seeks board approval to indemnify Moody's Investor Services for past and future rating services. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Letourneau. Because this is consent, there is no discussion. I'll ask Ms. Ellison to call the roll.
Chair Smedberg.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gideby.
Aye.
Vice Chair Goldman.
Aye.
Alternate Director Rouse.
Aye.
Director Letourneau.
Aye.
Alternate Director Meridian.
Aye.
Director Slater.
Aye.
And Director McMillan.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. Now we'll move to jurisdictional reports. Ms. Gideby for the District of Columbia.
No reports at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Goldman, WSTC.
Yes, I have two things to report on this afternoon. The Washington Suburban Transit Commission on December 16th at 3:30 will hold its semi-annual public meeting, and we would invite the public to participate. It will be a virtual meeting, as all things are in these pandemic times. So if anybody in the public wishes to attend, please contact Pat Pesher, the Executive Director of the Transit Commission, and the Corporate Secretary, Ms. Ellison, can provide anybody with his contact information so that you can Zoom on or Microsoft Teams on December 16th at 3:30 p.m. Second item is I just want to recognize, as the General Manager did, Senator Paul Sarbanes, who had passed away. Mr. Sarbanes was a great senator, a great Marylander, and a great friend of transit. In fact, we've named the Silver Spring Transit Center, which adjoins the Silver Spring station of the metro system, in his name. So it is now called, in recognition of his contributions to transit, the Paul Sarbanes Transit Center. And so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman. Federal government, Mr. McMillan.
Nothing to report. Thank you.
Okay. And representing NVTC, I have one recognition. I'd like to recognize that our fellow board member, Matt Letourneau, on December 2nd, George Mason University Schar School of Public Policy and Government, during its second annual Regional Leadership Awards, recognized Matt for his service to the region. The director of the school, Mark Roselle, recalled Matt as being one of his best students at Catholic University 20 years ago. Was it one of the best or the best? No, his best student 20 years ago. And according to the Loudoun paper out there, Matt said that the connection has special meaning for him. So I just wanted to recognize Matt for that award and all that he's done on our side of the river, so to speak, not only as his role as the Loudoun County board member, but his work on the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission and now on the Metro board. So congratulations to you, Matt, on that recognition.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Yes, Mark Rosell was my professor at Catholic and now is the dean of the Sharp School. So it was kind of neat over this period to have that happen. Just another maybe thing to mention in terms of MVTC of interest, I think, to Mr. Goldman and others is we did receive a briefing last week on the American Legion Bridge project, kind of on the Virginia side of it and the work that VDOT and agencies are doing to prepare for that. And there was discussion of a transit connection between Virginia and Maryland, which I believe there's mutual interest in, that has been part of that planning exercise for Virginia. So I'm happy to send along the slides that went with that to Mr. Goldman and others that might be interested, but I know that's of note. And also MVTC had its legislative briefing with Senator Warner and others earlier this week. And of course, as has been said, our delegation and our Richmond delegation is all committed to doing everything they can to try to help us with this funding crunch.
And Mr. Wiedefeld participated in that as well.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that is it. Hold on one second here. I'm just, I think right now, Jennifer, I think we are still in executive session in a sense. We're just going to reconvene. I don't think there's a need for me to reread the request, is there?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. And with no further business to come before the board, we stand adjourned and we will reconvene in executive session. Thank you.